Thank you for joining us for Solutions for Sinking Cities, hosted by Unbias the News and Solutions Journalism Network. Joining us today are Christy Cole, Ope Adetayo, two freelance journalists, and Karen Florini, Vice President for Programs at Climate Central. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and the Solutions Journalism Network's website. Farah Warner from Solutions Journalism Network will be our moderator today.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I just want to welcome all of you who may be coming in from around the world. It is such a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited to be here with Ope, Christy, and Karen, and most importantly, to give an opening to this wonderful partnership that we have with Unbias the News, as well as Climate Central. As we come into this, we're really going to be talking about solutions for sinking cities. But to sort of set the stage for us, I wanted to give you a bit of background about Unbias the News and its Sinking Cities project. It really began looking at these sort of threats that are underway across the globe in cities such as Osaka, Japan, Shanghai, China, Alexandria, Egypt, Lagos, Nigeria, where Ope is based, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and in the United States, Miami, Florida, and San Francisco, which is where Christy is based. And their question that they asked was, why are we building instead of preparing? Why are we potentially putting populations in danger because of sea level rise instead of preparing for sea level rise? And so we brought these three people together to really dive deep into this. And we're going to be speaking with Ope about his work in Lagos, Christy about her work in San Francisco, and Karen is going to open us up to the tools, the data tools that Climate Central has available for all of you to be working with. Importantly, I wanted to highlight that Unbias the News, importantly, is working with local journalists around the world to do this. This Sinking Cities project is not about sending someone from somewhere else into a city to cover it. Instead, it is grounded in local journalism and local community. And they are training, providing networking, and importantly, finding paid opportunities for these journalists. So I just wanted to give a bit of information about that. And now I'd like to move on to solutions journalism and just give you a little bit of insight into who we are. So I'd love to tell you about our mission. Our mission is to bring solutions journalism and transform journalism so that all people have access to news that helps them envision and build a more equitable and sustainable world. I just want to hit on a couple of points there. This is about transformation of journalism, and it is about providing this type of coverage to people around the world, and that is our aim. Our aim is that by 2025 here in the US, 50% or more of news consumers will have access to this kind of news, and increasingly around the world. I also want to talk to you about our definition of solutions journalism. We are not just about saying we're going to transform journalism. We also have a clear definition about what solutions journalism is. Solutions journalism is rigorous, evidence-based reporting on responses to social problems. This is not about happy news or good news or greenwashing. We're very much focused on the rigor of this journalism, and you'll see that in Ope's work and in Christy's work. We're focused on investigating the solutions and holding those accountable. I want to go deeper into our pillars, which we have a framework, which we call the 4 Pillars framework, that can help you understand how to do a solutions journalism story. And both Christy and Ope and I are going to talk more about this, but what we're really focused on is what is the response? We are not that interested, although character is absolutely important in our stories and the work that we do, but the response is the main focus. How is something being done? Why? By whom? And we also really want to highlight the evidence of effectiveness. Evidence is the most critical part of solutions journalism. And you'll see this highlighted in both Orpe and Kristi's work when we start digging into it, because both of them have really grounded themselves in data and evidence. And importantly, we want evidence of effectiveness for the communities most affected by the climate crisis, and in this case, most affected by sea level rise. We also want to provide insights, and we also really want to focus on the limitations. There are no silver bullets. There is no one way to adapt to sea level rise or to prepare for sea level rise. There are nature-based and there are building-based, whether it's green or gray, as we like to call it in sea level rise. I do want to go just a little bit deeper and give you a little bit more information on those 4 pillars. So I want to come back to the limitations. Limitations are critically important, even if the limitations are the only thing that you can say is, this is the only information that I have. We often, I think in climate and the coverage of this, is that we don't want to show the limitations. We want to make sure that people really can see this is great, this is wonderful, and that is not what we are about at Solutions Journalism. And again, you'll start to see this more in the work that we do. I want to move on. I believe that we have a slide for Unbias the News, and I want to make sure that we get to that so that everyone has an opportunity. If you want to learn more about Unbias the News, please check them out at this website. There's more information about their Sinking Cities project as well. So I want to head into our conversations now. And I'd like to bring in Ope Adetayo to talk about the work that you've been doing in Lagos.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Farah, for bringing me in. It's my pleasure being here. So, for the past few months, I've been, investigating how Lagos is preparing for the sea level rise, and I found out that we have not been preparing at all. And this whole concept of sea level rise, to the Lagos State government, which Lagos State is a coastal city and it's just like 1 meter above sea level. So if we hit the projected sea level rise, it's going to be a catastrophic, situation for the state. And realizing that we haven't been doing much because this whole discussion we're having is, more of an academic exercise than a reality to the government of the state. So I've been looking at their possible response, where they may be, and their lack of response to certain issues around sea level rise. But most importantly, what I discovered in my project so far is the fact that the problem is we're having a clash of development and environmental protection and sustainability.
Okay, Orbe, can you speak, when we spoke back in, I don't know, when we first met, it was back in the summer. Can you talk about the different ways that in Lagos, there have been different ways of thinking about sea level rise and protection? So there might be nature-based, there might be seawalls. Can you talk about what's happening on the ground in Lagos as the city is working to deal with this, even as it also continues to develop, probably in places where it shouldn't. So could you give us just maybe paint a picture of what Lagos looks like right now? You mentioned the Great Wall of Lagos. I'd love for people just to get a sense of what is happening in this city.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Farah. So most importantly, it's important to know that what we have in Lagos is, what has been theorized as the politics of space, whereby Lagos is being, made or created to serve, a particular class, and it's like pushes out a particular class, which is like the lower class. So we have the real estate industry, on the rapid rise, which in fact has made Lagos one of the most expensive, markets for real estate in Africa, and one of the most expensive in the world. So there are certain infrastructural development ongoing in Lagos, whereby we have the Eco Atlantic, an artificial city, which is a child of necessity, because like Lagos is an island, and most of it is an island rather, and they needed to build certain infrastructure to protect valuable lands from being eroded by coastal erosion and sea level rise. But what they did was to carve out spaces for the rich at the expense of the poor. So the Great Wall of Lagos, Farah mentioned, protect the Eco Atlantic City, which is like a multi-billion-dollar infrastructural project. And as it said, it is like protecting the project for the next 100, 200 years, or at the Titanic level, whereby it is believed that no amount of sea erosion or no amount of sea surge could break this wall down and destroy this project. But this kind of project is not only peculiar to the Eco Atlantic. We have other huge mammoth infrastructure development, like port development elsewhere, refinery development in another part of the state, whereby they continuously build these walls, so to speak, this barrier to protect this infrastructure. But this is at the expense of the poor coastal communities, whereby they have to suffer the reflection of the sea surge. So what is happening in Lagos, to summarize it, is a case of what has been terrorized as the politics of space, whereby the state government continues to create safe spaces for the rich and the upper middle class who can afford these spaces, and are not thinking about sustainable projects or sustainable solutions for the lower class, the low income class, who are affected mostly by climate change issues.
I'd love to dig into this politics of space. I think it's really important as we think about the solutions to sea level rise, because it feels like, I know here in the United States, it's the people jump to this sort of conclusion, this solution of let's build a seawall. And what that can do is it may protect, as you've said, sort of the higher income, the higher economic class of people, but then it also creates problems outside of that. Can you speak about how these seawalls are affecting other communities, and maybe talk a little bit about that, and then I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, definitely. So the science behind the seawall is that when you build these seawalls, the thing is, the ocean has a dynamic with the land, right? So the wave will come, it is natural. And when you build a seawall, what it does is it stops the surge at a particular location, while it deflects this wave, this surge, this force to another location elsewhere, like it's downstream. So if, for example, in Lagos, the Eco Atlantic is being protected by this seawall, this Great Wall of Lagos, but there is a place called Alpha Beach, which is like downstream, which these forces are heading to, and the erosion in that part is massive. I did some satellite investigation on the beach and how it has been eroded in the past 5 years, and I realized that 80 meters of land has been lost. But like in environmental sense, it's like a huge figure. 80 meters of land we lost. It's not like the usual measurements we use. So that is how it works. That is the mechanism. You can't stop this nature, and you can't force the water elsewhere. And what makes the case of Lagos worse is that the natural protective barriers are also being depleted, and that's what we call the wetlands. So we have like a lot of wetlands in Lagos, but the issue is Lagos is a very small state with a very huge population. In fact, it's instead of like 3,500 kilometers square, if I'm correct, or something around that number, with a population of like 25 million people. So currently, as we say, there is no space in Lagos, but we keep having this, rural to urban migration, which does not stop. So we need more space. Then we started encroaching into like this wetland. We fill them up and to build more lands, right? This is not a new phenomenon. We started with the British colonialism, but like it hasn't stopped and it hasn't, it is not reducing anywhere because what the government conceptualize is that when they see a wetland, and which is like a more general perspective, even beyond the corridors of power, is that this wetland is a wasteland. Like, I mean, why could you just have like these acres of land, lying fallow, doing nothing? So we could just like fill it up and like build valuable land, build valuable houses for people to live. But what we don't understand, or like what majority of people don't understand, and what the government actually understands was not willing to take action on, is that this wetland serve, environmental purposes. So when it deflects, when the sea the Great Wall or like the sea wall deflect the force, some of these forces are supposed to be absorbed by the wetland, but these wetlands already have been like blocked because now have houses and not green areas.
Yeah, it's interesting to me to think about how this fits into our frameworks of solutions journalism. We have a response, which is the seawall. We understand its limitations. Its limitations are that it adversely affects other populations. And its evidence of effectiveness, you may look at the evidence of effectiveness and say, oh, it's protecting this group of people. But when we really ground the evidence of effectiveness in communities most affected by the climate crisis, we can see that actually this seawall, this Great Wall of Lagos, is what we may call an instructive failure.
Yeah.
It is to be investigated, and even though it may have appeared to and be seen as a great solution or a good solution, it in fact is not. And we're going to talk more with Christy as well, because what I think is interesting is two cities, in two different continents facing very much some of the same problems. I wanted to, as we sort of wrap up at least this portion, because we're going to bring you back for Q&A with Christy, are there any solutions that you have investigated that you do feel are centering the communities most affected by the climate crisis? So the lower income, particularly the people migrating into Lagos.
People have like banded together to demand, more effective solutions from the government. But the insight I got from this story is like this is a government, this has to be a government-led program of a government-led solution, and the government is not ready to like take that route. So the solution is that people are coming together to demand, better responsibility from the government, and to sort of like relocate them, to make sure like they don't have some of these forces coming their way, and to like build lesser walls, and look for peculiar solutions to different coastal communities, because the way the dynamics works in different is different from different coastal communities. So these people have been coming together, and there's, for example, a particular initiative in Lagos called Lagos Urban Initiative Development, which has been like at the forefront of mobilizing these communities to demand better from the Lagos State government. But so far, the response on the government has been very, very underwhelming.
Great, thank you, Ope. As I said, we're going to bring you back for Q&A at the end of our session, but we're now ready to bring in Karen Florini.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Hi, Karen. It's nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure indeed. I appreciate very much your accommodating my schedule. We're all actually, Climate Central is having its first time in 3 years staff retreat. I've ducked out to do this, and so I'm not going to be able to stay till the Q&A session at the end, unfortunately, but I'll try to leave at least about a minute at the end to see if there are any questions of clarification after I've gone through my presentation.
Great. Well, we'll let you take it away. Karen from Climate Central, please go ahead.
Thanks. So I think the tech people, yeah, here we go. Great. Okay, so just a couple of things about, it's not advancing. There we go. So a couple things about Climate Central. We are nonprofit research and communications organization. One very important thing is we are not an advocacy group. I want to stress that very emphatically. We never take positions on particular technologies or policies. We do, of course, report from time to time, especially on the technologies, but that's not us advocating for them any more than when we are reporting on hurricanes. We specialize in providing the grist for data-driven stories. We provide data-driven, data-rich, highly localized resources on climate impacts and solutions. We're chiefly functioning as business to business. We're providing those materials to media and other climate communicators, not so much pushing them to the general public. And with that, let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to run through a half a dozen tools very, very quickly. First of them being tax parcels. Next, please. And next. This is a report that we just issued earlier this month, actually, that compiles data on what's going to get flooded where and what the property value is, with clear implications for the tax base of those communities. Next, please. Once you've selected your state and county, you can then click the download button, or you can look at the national report. Next. So if on a county report, what you're going to see is an awful lot of really nerdy statistics and tables together with some explanatory prose. So this is very much a data journalism type of tool. Next, please. Coastal risk screening tool. Next, please. This is something that shows you the impact by decade from 2030 out to 2150. Next, please. Showing what gets wet at those particular decades. And if you click on the interactive button below, next please, you can see a bunch of different parameters that you can change, including the pollution trajectory. You can also look at sea level rise itself, or by decade, or by annual. This tool, unlike the tax parcels tool and several of the other tools that I'll talk about, this tool is global. All regions of the globe outside of the poles. And we have some particularly sophisticated flood modeling and digital elevation data sets that are frankly the best in the world for non-US locations. Next, please. So if you click the drop-down menu up at the upper left, you can see the different map layers that we currently have available. There are quite a few. Next, please. One of them is a map layer that lets you compare particular temperatures. So on this one, we're comparing 1.5 degrees Celsius long-term sea level rise to 3 degrees. And you can see that a lot more gets wet at 3 degrees than at 1.5. Next, please. If you click on in the upper right, if you switch from basic view to satellite view, you get a sort of more colorful, or at least I think visually interesting representation of the same information. Next. Next tool is Risk Finder. That's a long scrolling feed with a number of different components of it. I think the most interesting of these is what is at risk. The user selects the location and the water level of interest, and then sees a whole bunch of different data displayed about what gets wet at, or who gets wet at that particular water level. This is a compilation of about 110 different databases, mostly from the US government. This tool is US specific. We are about to do we are actually in the process of beginning a massive overhaul of this to greatly improve the UI UX on it and make it a more user-friendly. We expect to be launching that early next year, but already it is a very comprehensive data source, and one that is often used by user communities, frontline communities, as a way for them to get data for free that they can use very effectively in participating in stakeholder processes. Next, please. So among other things, in addition to population, you can look at buildings such as medical facilities and schools and so forth. You can also look at infrastructure such as roads and airports and train tracks, etc. Next, please. Next is our picturing our future. So if you're not so much interested in nerdy statistics and detailed maps, you can look at some pictures. This again is for long-term consequences of sea level rise. For my hometown of Washington, D.C., this is what the capital area continues to look like after 1.5 degrees of warming. But after 3 degrees, we got a new national swimming pool on the Capitol front lawn. Next, please. So this is searchable in a whole variety of different ways. We've got about 189 locations around the globe, and a total of nearly 1,000 different images and image sets on this, some of which are flyover videos, some of which are GIFs, and some of which are stills. All of that is findable through this interface. Next, please. Next is our partnership journalism program. This is where we partner directly with local media outlets and sometimes national media outlets. This again is primarily US at this time. We bring story concept, relevant data, science writing. The local partner does what they do best, which is feature reporting on an in-depth basis that puts a human face on the topic for their community. And then it is co-bylined typically and co-published. Next, please. This is a handful of the sinking cities type related materials that we've done of late. One on use of oyster shells to reinforce sea level barriers. One is on mangroves, and one is on rising levels of salt in farm fields. Next, please. This kind of approach also lends itself very effectively to stories with significant equity elements in them. So we have a tool called the portfolio analysis tool that's not a public tool, but that allows us to say for a particular data set of locations, we can say, here's what's getting wet over time at that set of locations. We did that as a report. And NBC4 in Washington, D.C. picked that up and ran about a 6-minute story that was developed with us, which of course is a very long time for a local news broadcast. Next, please. Many of these partnership journalism stories have a very strong climate equity component, such as this one that ran actually on Fox in Charlotte. Next, please. And a number of other stories have also been that. And the last thing I'll mention is our real-time climate system, which, next please, goes ahead and provides alerts of this sort. So it's a very short alert. It says something for the particular alert recipient. And again, we're not pushing this directly to the general public. This is for media and climate communicators primarily, although we don't exclude people from signing up. And when something is happening in the location or locations for which you are signed up, then you get an alert saying this thing is happening or forecasted to happen in your location. Here is a visual to assist you in your reporting on that. Next, please. So we also provide that not just for our coastal flood tool, but also for the weekly reporting bulletins that we use, again, providing data-driven story components directly to people, for our weather power tool, where we've combined all of the data on actual installed capacity of wind and solar throughout the United States, and for our climate shift index. Next, please. That allows you to, and this page will allow you to sign up if you would like to start receiving those alerts. You can also use the QR code. Once you sign up, you have to sign up for one location, but after you've signed up, you can add additional locations. You can customize by topic and frequency. So I think one more slide. Yeah, and then I did want to mention that our climate shift index provides a scale of -5 to +5, indicating how much of a climate fingerprint there is on daily air temperatures in that location. Right now, it's only for the United States. By the time of the climate conference in November, we are going to have at least an initial version of it for global air temperatures. Then we're going to be adding additional impacts to this system over time. So it's a way to quantify the attribution of climate climate effects globally. There are a number of ways to use this information in solutions journalism. One is that our tools show the benefits of climate action, including action that slows the pace of sea level rise, and especially the coastal risk screening tool's capacity to toggle between emission scenarios in the year map. Next, please. And then to pull in the photos that accompany those parts of the map. So I've made a summary slide here that has all the URLs on it. I'm happy to supply this slide deck to be circulated after the talk. And with that, I think we're at the end of my talk. And again, here is the sign up link. I think we have maybe 1 minute left for any questions of clarification at this point.
Sure, Karen. I'm still seeing that Washington D.C. photograph in my mind. I'm like, the national swimming pool. It's amazing how images can just sort of directly affect the way that we think about climate change. So I really appreciate. I know you want to get back to your staff retreat. So really, I just wanted to say thank you, and we'll make sure. Obviously, we're out on Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook. So if we get comments or questions from our audience, I'll make sure that they get compiled and sent to you folks at Climate Central. So thank you again. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. And again, I'm really sorry I can't join the Q&A session. It just was a scheduling issue because this is a long planned retreat. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
We'll catch you later. Bye. Thank you. All right. So now we're going to move to Christy Cole, who is a San Francisco-based journalist who has been reporting on sea level rise in the San Francisco Bay. Christy.
Yes. Hello, everyone. And I want to thank everyone wherever you are for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Christy. So let's open with just tell us what you've been working on. You and I have been together in the Business and Sustainability Initiative for a few months, maybe about a year now, I think. And you're working on a really fascinating project on Treasure Island, but I'm going to let you tell the audience what you've been investigating. So go ahead.
Sure. So in San Francisco, there's an outcropping from the city called Treasure Island and Yerba Buena Island. It's sort of midway in San Francisco Bay between San Francisco and Oakland. And Yerba Buena is actually a bedrock island, and there's like a small little rocky shoal upon which the Army Corps of Engineers actually built Treasure Island, dredging up sand and everything. So largely the island that I'm talking about and focusing on is landfill. And that island is, 400 acres. And on this island, for a long time, it's been home to a Navy base. It's been home to about 2,000 to 3,000 people, mostly low income, who've lived on the island now. And it's the Navy has sold the island to the city, and now San Francisco is looking to develop this island, and it's been the object of a lot of discussion, excuse me, and a lot of planning. And they only within the last 4 years kind of started working on the construction part of it. The project was approved a little over 10 years ago by our city. So they're taking an island that is built on landfill in the middle of the bay. So it's in deep waters. And now you layer on top of that sea level rise. So from the outset, and when the plans for this island came along, it was at the time that California state officials, our governor at the time, had asked that we study what climate change effect was going to have on coastal cities and coastal areas, and for these what was going to happen to be included in our planning for building and development, especially in coastal areas. And so then At the same time, our local regulator, which handles coastal development, but only within the first 100 feet of the shoreline, that regulator also had to develop plans that incorporated sea level rise. And so we ended up with this Bay Plan and this state plan, and they all focused around two numbers at the time. And so this is around 2010. Of sea level rise. And this was around this time that the city approved plans from the developers for Treasure Island as well that adopted these very numbers. And they were looking at sea level rise of, and I'm sorry for our international audience, we use the English measurement system here. But I would say it's roughly they were focusing on roughly a half a meter sea level rise at mid-century, so it's 16 inches, and at 2050 and at 54 inches by the end of the century. And so those are the numbers that were put into the plans for Treasure Island. But also the engineers decided that, okay, we have to come up with an adaptation strategy. So they borrowed all the pieces from what you would call the sea level rise playbook. They decided to raise the development pad on which they were going to build all the new housing. And they have decided to raise it 3.5 feet plus an additional 6 inches. So it would be a little over a meter, really, of raising the development pad, in addition to just trying to solidify the whole island. So they've taken and brought in a lot of sand, and they've brought in a lot of heavy material to pad it down and stamp down to create sort of a bedrock-like surface. And these are techniques that have been used for a long time in other places around the world. And then in addition to raising the pad, they've also set back or created a bit of a buffer. But remember, this is only a just a little over 400 acre island. And so, the development in some areas is 100 or 200 to 300 feet away from the shoreline. But you're limited, of course, because it is an island. And then finally, what they're doing is they're also creating the northern part of the island is known to sink, a part of it, the northwest corner of it. And it's the area that has tended to flood. And so, and right now it's where the residents who do live there, the some 2,000 residents live. And so the developers are going to relocate these residents. They've promised them that they would get access to housing in the new development. And then they're going to clear out all of the old housing, and they're going to make that a wetland. So sort of a natural buffer. So that's another part of the sea level rise playbook. And then finally, in the future, they're going to, they have a seawall around it. It's a wall that pretty much defines the shape of the island, and it is being built up in some areas, certainly near the development and on the southern end of the island, to raise it up to allow for 36 inches of sea level rise, so just under a meter, and then around other parts of the island to allow for 16 inches of sea level rise. And then over time, that is the part of the main adaptation will be to raise this wall over time, as well as to add in pumping stations. And so that's pretty much what they're doing. But what's interesting to me also is that it's this San Francisco and California has a housing crisis, as some of you may know, and so we need to build. But we're building in an area that's a floodplain, and we're taking an island that has housed 2,000 people, and we're building a whole new neighborhood, and we're going to increase the population 12-fold to be 20,000 to 24,000 people. So
yeah. It fascinates me, Christy, as you were describing this. I just get this sense, this visual, and I wrote down. So they're moving the low income community. They're doing a managed retreat for them, or we hope, so that the high income community that they hope will move into these apartments and homes can have bay views, basically can have an ocean view. Can you give me a sense of what is the investment what's the dollar number on this Treasure Island development?
It's a $6.1 billion project.
So one of the things that I wanted to sort of connect the dots, particularly between what Karen from Climate Central was offering, which is just such a data trove. It's a treasure. You started looking at this and investigating it, and we had a conversation about this. Sounds like an instructive failure solution story. And you went to the U.S. Geological Survey and started to ask more questions about had they actually raised it enough. And I wonder if you could talk about your investigation of that data and where you are now with your investigation.
Sure. Yes. One of the first questions that were asked of the developers 10 years ago when they came up with this plan was, what was the rationale behind raising the development pad 3 feet or 3.5 feet versus, say, higher to match the projections for the end of the century. And there really wasn't, other than that this was the way to go in terms of expense, and you could only perhaps put so much soil down and make more bedrock. And so what I wanted to see was whether that was enough. And I happened to be looking at I was in a tutorial actually for this tool that the US Geological Survey had developed, and they were using it with city managers to look at, for them to actually use to see whether they needed to move, what was happening on their coastal communities. And in reading the science papers about it, I thought, wow, I really need to have these folks model what's happening in Treasure Island. And so in doing that and in working with the scientists, they used a different emissions scenario. There are several emissions scenarios or major emissions scenarios that are used in looking at predictions, at least in California. And one of the emissions, the more common one that they use when they're talking about level of sea rise at mid-century, is one of where we're in this, business as usual, where the emissions are high as they are right now, and we're on a path to raising global temperatures such that seas will rise quite a bit. And then the other extreme is at the lower end, that they will rise, temperatures will rise and emissions will remain the same up until 2040, when we will curb them quite a bit, and that will bring things down. And the problem with those scenarios, according to the Geological Survey, is that those do not create a set of, they don't bring, basically they want to encourage people to plan for the worst case scenario. And in San Francisco Bay itself, which is protected by the Golden Gate, it has its kind of own current system. It's both shielded, but at the same time, it yields other issues because the waters are deeper. The coastlines tend to be rocky and abrupt drop-offs. And so you're dealing with perhaps a bigger volume of water that's getting moved around by winds and storms. And so they looked at sort of a mid-level emission scenario that generated a bigger storm surge and other elements that would add to the total water level. And so in doing that, they found that by the time we calculated it all out, by the end of the century on Treasure Island, looking at their base floor elevation of the development, the lowest level, that would be perhaps 15 inches underwater at the end of the century. And that's kind of what we found. And one of the things that we discovered was that the modeling that the development team has done does not account for storm surge. It is only looking at sea level rise.
Yeah, I think there's so much in this that what I love about have loved about kind of having a window into your world, Christy, is the depth to which you have gone to really understand the data and the science and going back to the US Geological Survey and asking these questions. It sort of feels as if, developers kind of cherry pick the science that they want. And I think if we go back to the solutions journalism 4 pillars, that means the response can be questioned and it can be held accountable. We can show its real limitations. I'd love to bring Orpe back into the room so that we can start to set up for a conversation. And I do want to let the viewing audience know, please feel free to drop questions, in comments on whatever, wherever you're viewing this. So along the bottom on the ticker, you have the information on how to do this. Orbe, you've been listening to Christy. Do you have any questions for Christy as you listen to what she's been doing? Don't mean to put you on the spot, but the two of you are doing similar work in 2 different parts of the globe. So any questions for Christy?
No,
You don't have any? Okay. So Christy, I wanted to go to, you told this story. You had been going out to Treasure Island and, very focused on the development. And you went back out and you ended up meeting the community members who live on the island. Can you talk about I'd like to get into some of the reporting or the journalistic practices that the two of you have really engaged in. I wonder if you could tell us what that brought for you, and how you might be including that in the stories that you're working on, meeting with those community members.
Yes. So, what I found in talking to, I was near what is a food bank on the island, and it's run by a community organization. And one of the first things I learned is they were distinctly unhappy with my interviewing people there in their parking lot, even though it was a public property. But I did go and talk to people, and a number of people do not speak English. And I found they speak Chinese, they speak Spanish, and I found that, in many cases, if they didn't speak English, they were relying on a neighbor or a family member to tell them what was going on in terms of, and the information that I was looking for was, were they aware of the plans and the development, and what were they hearing about their getting to move? Because the promise has always been made that people who've lived on this island for a long time would get access to low income units that they have. There's a certain percentage, there's I forget exactly the exact percentage. I'm sorry, because of pressure of being on camera here. But there's a percentage that has to be low income. There's also an additional area that is for formerly homeless veterans, and that unit has actually just opened. But there is a question about whether there will be enough units for the people who have been living in the housing that's on the island that's been dilapidated. I should also mention that the land that the people where they currently live on this northern end of the island is a Superfund site that the Navy has yet to finish cleaning up. It was used for radiological dumping for materials that were used, say, to make night vision goggles. And so, there's a lot to be done still in that area, but it's mostly just trying to get at, in speaking to just the rank and file resident, it seemed like if you didn't speak English very well, you didn't really understand what was going on. I did speak with people who were organizing people on the island, and they're not necessarily focused on the sea level rise, because, I think for a lot of people, it's hard to fathom whether, that as being a threat versus what else that they've been dealing with. I mean, they already have dealt with flooding. I mean, there are pumps on the island, and they have other more immediate concerns. So I was just looking at what their main concerns are and what they're being told, and how the city is following through on the promises of giving them housing after they move.
Yeah, you make a really great point, Christy, is many of these community members have already been dealing with the effects of the climate crisis for decades, because flooding happens. Ope, I wanted to return to you. Actually, one quick thing. I wanted to give a shout out to Ray Palumbo, who is an African fellow from Africa Fellow 2021, Solutions Journalism Fellow from Kenya. So happy to have you here. One of the things that he does note, which Christy, you've noted, is that a main problem is the language to reach wide audiences. Like, how do we, language is a problem. How do we make certain that the people most affected by these developments actually get the information? And I wanted to go back to you, Ope, because you had, we kind of didn't get to dig deeper. You were talking about how community members in Lagos are now starting to come together and actively question the government and hold it accountable for what it's doing in sea level with sea level rise. Do you want to expand on that a bit? Is there movement there? Are you starting to see solutions that are more focused on the low income communities?
Okay, yeah, definitely. Thank you, Farah. So it is still in its embryonic stage, because one thing that I found, one issue that I felt like was a common denominator across these communities, because they are like low income, is that most of the time they don't really understand the science behind this thing. I remember going to a particular community and I told them the sea, there's a sea level rise, and they thought it's in the literal sense about the water was going to go higher, so which shows like a gap of knowledge between people like me on this platform today, and people are like actively facing the consequence of climate change and the sea level rise. So I think they are starting to understand in lay terms, in layman language, as much as they can, to see the cause and effect of these things. And they are trying to like come together and say, okay, we would not allow these. I mean, they are like pretty the whole movement, the whole nascent movement is like pretty ineffective at the moment, but it's like starting to form. People are starting to like have a better consciousness of what sea level rise is, and the science behind it, and who are those responsible for it. So even though they don't have like the larger picture, but they know that in their own state, these are some of the factors causing this. Because if you look at the past, if you go back to these communities 20, 30 years ago, these problems were not there. So they're starting to question, why are we having this problem in the last 5, 10 years now? And they could easily trace it to some of these problems, like some of these wars, this project that are like talking about in the past. So like their initiative trying to bring these communities together, justice for equal rights, Lagos State Urban Initiative Development. So like these NGOs trying to like expand the consciousness of these people and let them know, okay, this wetland, is meant to be protected. If it's not protected, this is what happened. Okay, what happened here is as a consequence of this. It's still at its very early stage, like I said, but like I think we are getting to that stage, because the consequences are not like real and very palpable. People are dying, floods are everywhere. It's raining season in Lagos, like it just finished raining now. I have to like mute myself so that it doesn't disturb Christy while she was talking. The rains are heavy, floods everywhere, and I think more people than before are now having like a better understanding of why this is so and what is happening.
It's such an interesting. I think when we think about solutions journalism, a next place to potentially go, as you said, Ope, this community activism is in its embryonic stages, but that's powerful. that's that's sort of a pilot area. We had another journalist who was in the Business and Sustainability Initiative that Christy was in, looking at sea level rise on the coast of Virginia. And she did a story around a community that had started working with an NGO that was helping them just understand what was happening to their community. Because at the base of it, it really is education and information. And so many of us don't have that information about our world. Christy, I'm going to throw this to you. Did you have any questions for Ope as you were hearing him speak, given that the two of you are working on kind of connected issues from around across the globe?
I guess mostly I was noting some of the similarities and then some of the things that were opposite. And I guess maybe this is more of like wanting to just kind of understand again, there is managed retreat one of the options that are they trying to get people to move away from the coast, and what would be the plan for that?
Oh, okay. So there is no plan, to move people away from the coast. People are migrating away from the coast themselves, and they have to do this, on their own terms, because, like I said earlier on, the government is not like, they're not like the priority of the government, and that's like what my story is like. My project is like trying to like look at like, okay, there's a section of the society, a larger section of the society actually, which is like, which are like facing these consequences at a more, devastating level than these people are trying to protect. So, and because there are millions of these people living at the coast, and the way Lagos State geography is like, there are a lot of coastal communities and a lot of slum. I think there's a United Nations data that I saw back then. About 60 or 70% of Lagos State population lives in slum, and most of these slums are like at the coastal, because like, the state is so small and there is technically no land. So people are like, there's a huge population of people on the waters and at the coast. So if it gets unbearable, they just leave. It's not like there's a plan to like relocate them, because there's no way to even relocate them to start with.
Yeah, Christy, you bring up and we've got about 3 minutes left. Time has flown by. This concept of managed retreats, has come up in a number of places. This idea that we need to retreat from the coast, and it's a difficult thing because it really is about our home. It is about where we live, and we invest in that. It looks like we may have lost Christy. And I think it's really important, and here she's coming back, is managed retreat is a solution, but it may not be, but it is a solution that we can hold accountable and we can really question. I don't know if either of you have, and we actually have a comment, and I'm just going to read it out loud. This again is from Ray. I'm from a vulnerable community from the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. I'm glad the methodology approach for SJN is really unique, because it brings a change in the camp, and through some of my fellows in the refugee program, refugees are now able to find solutions to problems affecting that, and he's really proud of that. So thank you, Ray, for that comment. I really appreciate it. As we come to a close, I just, Ope, do you have any final comments, anything you'd like to say? We've got about 1 minute, so 30 seconds apiece.
Okay, so as a final word is what I would just try to say is, we still have a long way to go, but we don't have much time. And I think it is very important, very consequential that we try to emphasize more on the consequences that we're facing.
Thank you. Christy, any final comments?
I would just piggyback on what Orpe had to say, that we really need to work quickly, because as by the day, the news on the climate itself has not been positive. So That's it.
Well, I wanted to thank you. Thank you, Christy. I wanted to thank you both and a shout out to Karen, even though she's in her staff retreat, for offering and presenting all those tools. I hope everybody was able to gather those. It's been a pleasure and thank you so much. And goodbye from here in New York City. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, your evening, or your morning. Thank you. You can see more information about our newsletters here at Solutions Journalism Network. And thank you as well to our partnership with Unbias the News. It's been wonderful working with you on the Sinking Cities project.